born upon a stage, was once a race of actors. But strange to tell, they lived out their days behind the curtain. And perhaps even stranger was the fact that they all sensed there was something on the other side of the divider, yet few made any attempt to reach it. There was once a planet of puppets, but not your routine sort. No, sir. These puppets were born believing that they were also their own operator and script writer, which facilitated them becoming masters of their world. Apparently. Which, after all, is good enough for creatures of illusion. Looking in any direction, at any human activity, even ordinary minds can always perceive a two-stage progress that has occurred therein. But never a third step is seen. Curious, no? Well, no, it's not. Not if you take into account that it is binocular sight that is responsible for such perceptions. The reason you see so few mystics wearing glasses is because the human nose is not naturally constructed to support spectacles with more than dual lenses. The story of one man. There was once a man who lived in a forest and eventually decided he wanted to leave. And to do this, he concluded that he'd have to specifically bring his attention under focus control. And to do this, he began to try and think of nothing but bluebirds. And after a while, this seemed lacking. So he began trying to think of nothing but clouds. And after a while, this too seemed unsatisfactory. So he began trying to think of nothing but the wind. And after a while, this became unsuitable. So he began trying to think of nothing but his total existence in the woods. And when this seemed to become less than profitable, he began trying to think of nothing but what might lie beyond the forest and what life might be like out there. And after some time spent along this line, he said not to tell you any more about him. On several occasions during the semester, a certain student had complimented the instructor on his efforts. And finally, after the most recent such, in which the matriculate said, "Professor, today's was your best lecture ever," the teacher responded with a comment. In such observations, what you should really say is that, in your opinion, today's was my best lecture ever. And the pupil pondered this for a moment, then replied, "But from what other possible basis can I say anything?" And the instructor realized the futility of pushing this further. Are you sure you're listening the right way? That's the title. What can the mind say to clouds, the oceans to fish, hormones to thoughts, and the future to an ordinary man? The reason you see so few mystics wearing hearing aids is for the very reason you should imagine, if you understand anything at all by now. Wartime during life. Out in the trenches was heard the warning shout, "We're being attacked by forces from without." But later, back in the general's tent, they began to suspect that the greatest danger lay within their own ranks. Only those who come to understand the illusion of conflict ever escape it. Idiocy test, part 27. Since everyone believes that their planet is on the verge of destruction, who but fools stick around and not try to leave? A lesser-known record of man says that, soon after his creation, when he developed the capacity for keen, focused sight, he swallowed a fog, and that his subsequent history has been that of him struggling to find his internal way out of this haze. There was once a world in which the dominant creatures were born with 3 legs, which was more than possessed by anyone else. But to drive them to realize their fullest potential, one leg was imaginarily hobbled at birth. Figure that story out, young readers. Tales and ideas which offer no challenge are like a life which doesn't, an existence that for a few is hardly worth the effort. One man kicked himself in the ass so consistently and for so long that he finally had the choice of either stopping it, learning to love it, or becoming a mystic. P.S. If you have any real trouble with this one, just pretend it's a joke. You've got to take sickness seriously to be sick, and knowledge seriously to be intelligent. What good is done telling sheep that they could fly, or men that they could be more manlike? Nah, come on. Get over it, snap out of it, give it up, and forget about it. Yeah, attaboy. The hidden dangers of denseness are far too hidden to be of any interest to most. Yeah, that's it. Potentials of man on which the collective agree are of no use to an individual, an alert, anxious one, that is. Look, life is far too nice a guy to ever come right out and tell you to bite its ass. P.S. again, if this one seems too harsh for you, just pretend it also is a joke, or a misprint, or something. Not only would a real musician not try to sound like anyone else, he'd try not to. Yeah. Reckon guitar picking's got little to do with thinking, huh? 'Tis said there was once an obscure religion which claimed that instead of a day of judgment to which all men were subject immediately upon death, everyone went directly to paradise, there to undergo a secret trial, whereby it was observed whether or not, after you'd had time to look around, you had complaints about the place. Yet another take on why the mystical so seldom seem religious. They don't have to die before realizing what's going on. Yeah. Before retiring each night, a certain increasingly alert man would say this prayer: stress is great, stress is good. I've made stress my neighborhood. If I should chill before I wake, this newfound focus, please don't take. There was once a mighty lake who for years stood high, firm, deep, and proud. Then the dam began to leak, at first just a seep, then a torrent, until near all the water had dissipated, lying shallow in the lowlands, a sad reflection of what it once had been. Reminder to open ocean swimmers: only those who have seen the future can fruitfully comment on the past, particularly in ways that can sound critical, but which in fact are but objective comparisons to things not yet commonly experienced by man. None but those who've made themselves well have any right to seriously speak of human illness. One reason that trains make so much noise is to give flaccid passengers something to occupy their mind. Collectively, man naturally thinks, so individually, no effort is necessary. Sole exception, those who really want to crank the thing up. If wolves could grieve, and did so around the body of a dead leader, men would say that such showings of love and respect was proof of the departed's normally unnoticed kindness and concern for the individual pack members. Still unable to directly recognize the natural dependency of the submissive on the dominant. Those who see this freely in life can see it within themselves, and of particular pertinence as regards their intellectual processes. How can you tell that an ordinary stupid person is thinking? They'll tell you what they're thinking. Those who see danger without seek assistance without. The logical is logical, but no one ever told man that his conception of it was exhaustive. When mathematicians sail to other planets, they always land on worlds of numbers. Piece of a persistent legend says that one mystical school claimed there was but one danger possible to man, that he'd get a sore in his mouth. One morning, One man awoke to find himself in the middle of a parade. So he went back to sleep and got over it. Two-man quiz. What's the difference between those who may actually know something and those who don't know anything? I give up what? Well, it's really hard to describe, but I can tell you this. Those who don't know anything are always trying to tell people what they know. Some internal organs were talking one day, and one of them said, the great thing about neurons as compared to hormones is that they don't wear out in the same way. Yeah. And another organ, which just happened to be the brain, responded, what do you mean a great thing about them? When it comes to matters of geography and topography, the joys, or lack thereof, of being discovered depends on where you were to begin with. Mm-hmm. The reason you see so few mystical travelers at the information counter is because they learned long ago what being lost is really all about. As regards normal concepts of education and knowledge, regard this. The mind only studies subjects, never the subject of the subjects. But then there was this other guy who simply couldn't wait to wake up every morning just to see what he'd think next. Wolves outside a pack will never naturally develop, and wolves who do not so develop can assuredly never develop beyond the standard level. So kids, stay in school, mind your parents, and above all, run away from home and don't listen to nobody. Just as some men feel like they have an ace in the hole in the game with life, that is, if things get too rough, they can always commit suicide, so does everyone have a similar sensation regarding their intelligence. That is, if they can't know what's really going on in life, they can at least act dumber than they originally believed they were. Yeah, take that, you old wife, you. There was once a land in which the stores which dealt in prayer, drugs, meditation, noise, and entertainment were all combined into a one-stop shopping outlet. Historical footnote. Have you noticed that hardly any of these kind of kingdoms I mentioned still exist? Have you ever thought that they never did? And that I'm actually speaking of the future? One man who said he simply didn't have the time to devote to a mystical quest, but was interested nonetheless, said that as an alternative he had adopted the hope that he would run out of thinking before he ran out of breath. Many a would-be mortal effort has gone with the name of, I should live so long. One man got so sick of the rubbish he heard on the radio that he attempted to smash the off-on switch of his with a hammer and accidentally knocked his ear off. The uncalculated cost of normal existence. Only men know that they will die, and only men believe that they must also pay for the privilege of being here to do so. The reason you see so few mystics with checkbooks or credit cards is because everything they want is not sold here anyway. The flow of spring sap makes all young trees dream of days they'll warriors be. But no conditions in the wood will later push them as they imagined they should. The day comes to all, timber alike, when they must each pull up their own roots and walk out of there on their own. Our specific subject tonight is taken from the first book of Deuteronomy. No, that's the general subject was going to be how men go through a process of externalizing what seems to be the forces controlling their lives. But also as a side dish. There was a news item that already pointed this out, that even ordinary men, no matter where they look, can perceive there has been a two-stage movement, normally perceived to be progress, a two-stage movement of progress in any given area, but never a third step. The side dish is, I was going to point out, it may become clearer after I get into the main course, but it is a kind of third eye blindness, because the mind, a man's mind will tell him and will see two areas concerning anything, such as he will see, well, I see that this is true, or I believe this to be true, and I also see that this is not correct. It is a part of binary sight. It works quite well enough at the ordinary level within a 3 or 4 dimensional reality, according to how you care to measure it, according to how capable you are of measuring it. But there is a third eye that is not seen, which is comparable to the third stage that I'm going to point out, that is never seen, although the mind continually perceives, whether it puts it this way or not, you'll understand it perhaps a little bit better in just a second if I ever get around to it. But in any given area, the mind can look, see, and if you point out or ask for its observation, any reasonable person will see that in any particular area that there has been at least a two-stage movement, a progressive movement. But that's it, no matter where it is, no matter what area it is. And I was just going to point out that this is reflected in these continuing so-called occult, now New Age ideas of a third eye, which is nothing new, but the whole idea that the simplistic believe that they find within remnants and records of what appears to be past mystical schools and disciplines of trying to physically develop a third eye. And they even have drawings that Buddha, right before he left, or somebody, that suddenly there they've got this third eye in their head. It took a while, several thousand years, for us to reach the point of having filmed them makeup artists and special effects capable of sticking on a third eye on someone and then stagger around on, in some sort of movie. But they're drawings several thousand years old of these creatures that look like they might as well be stepping off some papier-mâché flying saucer and sending out beams of light from their third eye. Nice try, folks. I mean, nice try for children. But I've got a better idea for you. It is a kind of third eye blindness, and it is a kind of recognition, without understanding it, that there is right in front of all men another stage of reality, another dimension of reality to which they're blind. And I say blind, they cannot directly perceive it, nor can they describe it in any ways that make immediate sense. And so therefore it always ends up in what they perceive to be a metaphysical realm, another worldly realm, that perhaps in some mystical way, or perhaps in another lifetime, or perhaps if I was touched by the gods, I would develop this third eye. Nobody ever says, what good would it do you? I mean, here's what they see in life. What the hell good's the third eye going to see? There they don't like what they see with two eyes, or you ask them, what sense do you make of life now that you've been engaged in this mystical study? Well, most of it, life is crazy, people are stupid, they're Philistines. So that's where you see life. Oh yeah, well, I see life as just a pain in the ass. Well, life is not lived correctly by most people. Whatever it is, the people's general attitude, even those that claim to be involved with some great spiritual struggle. The question that no one ever asks is, well, if you had a third eye, what good's that going to do? What's it going to do? Make you see that things are even worse than you thought? It is a third, I suggest to you, mental eye. That is a third, the perception of a third, a missing piece of reality. At any rate, here we go back to the other part. But that is of some significance, if you can see it in a second. I was going to take the idea of people externalizing what seems to be the forces controlling their life, but to go further. I brought it up last time. But to go further tonight and to show that there's apparently, from any civilized, sophisticated view, there appears to be already some movement, that there has been some progression. The most simplistic way is this, that men start off. Men started off historically, and of course men are continuing to replay the history of humanity, and so there are people still involved with this today, as large groups were, that we can say collectively, were in such a condition thousands of years ago. So it both existed then, and it continues to exist. And it's this, that the more simplistic externalize, you know what I mean, they see the forces that controlling their life, which they don't understand, but they perceive them to be external to themselves. That started off and continues to be, take your choice, the idea of gods, of any force outside of man. And of course, with gods, you also have demons. And you also have physical manifestations. A great one being drunks blaming the winemaker. Nowadays, the version is of treating narcotics as though the pusher, the dealer, the local crack house, the guy running the local crack house, that it's his problem, that's his fault, that you are addicted to crack. It's an old story. It's just a version of gods. Then when it gets into even areas that they thought would be a bit more sophisticated, or sometimes hoped to be more sophisticated by its participants, such things as astrology, that it's not just a god somewhere, that it's some sort of creative force, or the nature of creation itself is such that the arrangement of the planets are having either an absolute control over your life, but nowadays they seem to, as evidence of their sophistication, they go, well, they don't absolutely control what you do. They just, accept circumstances, it's up to you to react to it. Again, they were saying why you should pay somebody for that information. I mean, if the information's worth any money, it should be, hey, here's what you're locked into. But they say, well, here's what you're locked into, except for this. If you don't like that story, there's always a way out. Do you know what it is? Oh, no, but at any rate, it is still, you understand that there are forces, because everyone senses this, even the most simplistic. They sense that they are not, how shall we put it? How about like this? That they are very likely, at some times, not in absolute control of what is going on, even with their personal life. The simplistic, the first stage, is that you externalize. That the God has preordained it, God has turned, the good forces have turned evil forces loose, and they are now pushing you around in a nefarious, unprofitable manner. Or that other people are. And it can be, as I said, it could be the crack dealer responsible for your drug habit, or in a slightly, again, this is all in one category, but humanity considers this a bit more sophisticated, even if it's not localized to the crack dealer in your neighborhood. If it is, they see it as a bit of a more civilized, insightful progression to see it not just the crack dealer. He may be, oh yeah, the one selling the dope in the neighborhood, but it is the general social conditions that are doing it. That is the general social conditions. It's the poverty in which you were born that is now responsible for depressing you and getting you discouraged, and you become a dope head. That you get on dope or you become a drunk. That is taken, as many quarters now, it's been going on in the Western world under those descriptions, has been taken as a fairly well-established statement of reality. But, in case you never noticed, the story is 3,000 or 4,000 years old. It just seems to be a bit more sophisticated. Because, and I'm getting to this, that there's a second stage that people do perceive. That man seems to have gone from this externalizing that the forces that may be controlling my life, and I was going to say for better or worse, but do I have to point out to you what most people believe? I do. I believe we've covered this, but I'll do so again. When men find that they have behaved in ways that they find unacceptable, or when someone points it out to them and they feel guilty. It is then that men, by and large, will resort to externalizing what made them do it, that something made me do it, something beyond my control. So when I say for better or worse, the only better time, if it seems to be something of which they're proud, you very seldom hear men give credit to anyone else. It is social conditions, it is evil forces afoot in the world turned me into a drunk. But the few times I've been able to stop for a few months, that, my friends, was through my own willpower. Hey, it makes sense. I don't know why I'm about to go through all that dramatics of, hey, it makes sense, because in the city, what every city people say makes sense. That's why they say it. That's why certain urban forces drive them to say it. Those of you who are following along in your more substantial, advanced allegorical guidebook. There seems to be, however, if it's pointed out, which I'm about to do, that quite ordinary minds could agree with what I'm about to say, that there has been at least a two-stage progress. If I were talking to ordinary people, I wouldn't say that in advance. I'd say there has been some progress. Listen right quick with both ears. Let me back up and say, if I had started this and for some reason I was addressing an ordinary group of just ordinarily sane, educated people, and I said, I was going to talk on the subject of how men, in what ways men try to attribute or try to locate and ascribe to forces that seem to have control over their life, if that was the subject. And I would say, in the beginning, and I might just put it in a strictly historical basis and say that in more simple times, men ascribed to external forces, to external forces, the uncontrollable powers that seem to drive their life oft times. And then if I use the examples of how men made up, and I could say that was the beginning of men conceiving of gods and demons. It was forces outside themselves. They find themselves doing things, treating their friends, their family. They just find themselves acting in ways in life that they suddenly stop, or someone asks them to stop and consider what they've done, and they go, why did I do that? Or someone asks, why in the world did you do that? And you think, if you're a sane, ordinary person, I got no idea. I don't know why I did that. No, that's not a very acceptable place for human beings to stop and stand. And so they look for some reason. That's part of the nature of the mind. They look for some reason. And seeing none, in a sense, it made up some. Something made me do it. Well, what was it? I don't know. Which was God's first name. I don't know. And it took a while, and they changed it into, well, from I don't know to, well, I've never seen it. And then it's from I've never seen him, and I'm not sure who it is. And then they decide, well, it's some guy or some force. It's something that we've never seen. It's outside of our vision. In the beginning, it was good enough for people, let's say, speaking allegorically, to be standing down in Athens and to go, it's up on the top of Mount Olympus. It's up on the top of a mountain, that we can't climb to. It's too high up, but they live up there. And they look down. They can see us. They come down here and fool around with us and muck about in our lives, and we can't help it. That's it. And then they started climbing mountains, and they had to go up in the sky, and then, came along the Bible and other people, and they had to become, he lives up behind the clouds, and then became NASA, and they had to decide, well, they live outside this solar system. He's somewhere. Of course, there are those who still say he's hiding in that velvet factory in Mexico, but that's another story. But ordinary men would follow this if I said, if I point out, I know technically that would be Jesus, but also non-technically you Christians, or the Christians, have already decided that Jesus was actually God, and so it's just a way around of nobody knows what God looks like, and so, well, we'll paint Jesus. Because he won't take it so personally. They hope. Well, they look around at other parts of the world and realize that they did it to Buddha and other people, and Buddha didn't wipe out all the large segments of the population in Southeastern Asia and the subcontinent, so they figure, well, hey, he let it slide, I bet Jesus will let it slide. Well, it's either that or maybe it's the Mexicans are just such good artists and they portray him. He always looks so nice. Maybe that's it. And his hair's always, well, anyway. Maybe that's what being the Son of God is. You never have a bad hair day. I have no idea. I did not major in theology. They don't teach that in trade school. Back to the subject. Ordinary minds could perceive this. If I gave that quick history and said that men started out, as soon as they became conscious to any degree, and began, had time to stand around and socialize and begin to reflect upon the nature of life and their own behavior and etc., they realized that they did things continually that they found indefensible, indescribable. They could not perceive of why I just did that very thing. Just now, why did I do that? Why did I say that? And from there, the origins of religion, the origins of sociology, the origins of political commentary, because it fell into government, besides just God's. See, that's government. Gods were that, but government is like that. That they looked external, they looked without to find any possible source of the powers that were controlling their life. I remember I'm talking to ordinary people right quick, and they'll go, yeah. And I'd say, but notice this. In at least the 20th century, we have now a shift. It's not total, but there has been a shift now to where as men became more complex, that's more complex. As men became more complex, and they grew out of those more simple times, they began to look internally. They increasingly looked internally, which was the birth of what we call psychology. And that even today, we still have the more simple people in the world. And we all know who they are. It's represented sociologically. It's represented by the lower eco-sociological classes. The more simplistic people, those of fundamentalist religious leanings, they still ascribe, no offense to the people, it's just a fact, they ascribe still, by and large, to external forces the power exerted over their life. That the more fundamentalist they are, even today, the more will they dismiss psychology and any psychological attempts to explain the behavior of man. They will dismiss it as even being the work of the devil, of evil forces to try and dissuade man, to distract man from looking to the true source of evil. So we have, even today, we have simplistic people who are still looking, here we go, externally, to gods, demons, bad people. But even here within our midst, simultaneously, you have people who are now a bit more complex, who now say, well, that's too simple an answer, that does not, in fact, does not begin to throw any full enlightenment upon the question of why do men do things which is not in their own best interest. Why do men behave in ways that even they cannot defend immediately after having done what they did or said what they said? So now what we have are people who are more complex, and humanity in general, I could point out, is becoming increasingly so persuaded and more complex that more and more, or less and less, do we have, same thing, less and less do we have more and more people. How about that? Less and less do we have people ascribing to external forces the powers controlling their lives. And the more complex you are, the more sophisticated, the more evolved you are under ordinary conditions, the more you look internally. So the more complex, the more sophisticated, the more educated, the more up-to-date you are today, the more you would look internally as to the possible source of forces driving your life over which you seem to have no control than you do externally. In other words, a modern sophisticated person today, if it is pointed out to him or her, or if they become aware of it, that they do things, they continually do and say things that does not serve their own best interest, things that seem to be that they consider detrimental And then the question is right before everyone, always has been, why do I do that? The more sophisticated, educated, and up-to-date you are at the ordinary city level today, the more you would look internally for some subconscious trauma, something in your forgotten past, something that happened between you and a relative, you and another person, which has now been suppressed. It was so painful, or whatever the psychological explanation would be, that it has been suppressed to such a degree that you have consciously forgotten it, but now it continues to manifest itself in your behavior and make you do things which you consciously find immediately upon doing and saying that you find to be reprehensible, that you find to be outside your understanding as to why I did it, but there is the source of it. It's got to be. You simply cannot put your finger on it, but you look more internally as that being the source. It's got to be the source of powers controlling your life of which you are not completely aware. It has got to be that, as opposed to demons out there, that they're imps, they're trolls, they're bad spirits following me around making me do things. The devil made me do it. No, that was all right for our forefathers. That was all right for simpler times, but any sophisticated man or woman knows that is not true. That is not true, and they look internally. Do you hear? This is never pointed out, but this was the side dish I offered to begin with. Do you see that with ordinary people, that would constitute a fair observation? I could make a lecture out of that, and that would seem to be the end of it with ordinary people if they were interested in such matters. You understand now, I'd say, but we have gone from the simplistic time of men looking externally, just all people, just in simpler times, that was the beginning, that man looked external. Once he became conscious enough to talk about and reflect upon his own behavior, that almost immediately he realized he did things he shouldn't. If I have to refer you back to the Western version of creation, Adam was alive there in paradise. Paradise. Didn't have to work for a living, didn't have to get his hair cut, didn't have to do anything. Had it made. God said, oh, one thing you can't do. There's one thing. One little thing that didn't amount to anything. You can't do that. And I said, okay. God walked off within a matter of less than 2 days. I know it's not in that book you guys read, but anyway, it was less than 2 days. He did it. And it was even less than 2 days after that, God realized it. Or had somebody squealed on him or something. And he went, did you do that? And Adam went, well, yeah. And God looked at him like, are you crazy? And Adam thought, God Almighty, he's right. Am I nuts? Because he realized that he was probably going to have to pay for that. So you understand, almost the first thing that man did was fuck up. By his own admission, by his own realization. It's just not recorded, but you know damn well, if he had any sense. After God said, all right, get out of here, go get work for a living, don't I'm not even going to talk to you anymore directly, get out of here. So there you go, dragging his sorry ass out of the garden. Well, think how bad he felt. Think how bad he felt. The first man had direct contact with the Creator and screwed up over one little thing that didn't matter. So you can imagine, if I may put words into his little mind, there he goes, dragging himself down that long, dusty road, out of the garden. You know what he's thinking. He's going, how could I have done that? What was I thinking? So I could point out, and men would hear that we have gone from that time, and of course he blamed it on Eve. She blamed it on the snake. Everybody blamed it on somebody. So I could point out to the ordinary people, what I wanted you to get was the two-stage progression, which seems to satisfy when it is pointed out to people. And not just my story, this continually goes on. You've just never heard it. No one's ever had occasion to point this out or put it to couch the observation, the reality of it in these terms. But all people see, all ordinary minds perceive once they pick out some subject. If they see that there has been some positive movement, they only see it as being 2 stages. Always. And that's the end of it. I don't mean that the second stage they decide is completely satisfactory, but that's all they see. That seems to be, well, hey, that's it. The fact being, in this case, back to you playing the ordinary audience, that if I'd gone through all this and pointed out that man has gone from a more simplistic stage of originally looking to external forces, that was just the rule. He looked externally to find those kinds of forces, the kind of power that was directing, controlling his life in controlling his life in ways that he normally finds unsatisfactory, but controlling his life. That we have gone from that, and the audience could follow that. Yeah, I could give enough historical things like I just did with Adam and all kinds of little stories. Yeah. We have gone from that to now the less simplistic amongst us, and humanity in general has gone from that to now more and more looking internally, looking into themselves as to the location, as to the source of these kinds of powers and drives that make men do things that are not in their own best interest. That the forces, the controls, the forces that are controlling and driving or confining, restricting, whatever term you like, that men, the more sophisticated you are, the more you look internally for them than externally. And the audience will go, oh, and I could say, well, thank you. It's been enjoyed being here. Good night. I'm sure that I would have doctored up a little, but you understand, it sounded as though that I stated a premise and gave a little talk on it, and they go, that is interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, that we did go from that. From looking externally to gods and demons and even other humans, Adam blaming Eve, drunks blaming the distillers. Yeah, that's kind of silly. But I can understand how it happened, would think the audience. And then me point out, well, we have gone from that. It's taken thousands of years, and it's still not a done deal, because there's still people who believe, as our forefathers did, that still do take the simplistic view, that there are real gods and demons, good forces and evil forces external to this system that are in some way mucking about, running men's lives. If it's not that, it's the stars, the alignment of the planets. Yeah. That we have gone from that, by and large, to looking internally, to realizing that that is not the answer, it's internal. And the audience would think, and I say, thank you, that's all, good night. You understand? They think, well, I'm not trying to make more out of it than this, but I just want you to understand, an ordinary audience of sane people would take that as being, assuming they were interested in the subject, they would take that as being a worthwhile, meaningful lecture, that I took them from the beginning of something and showed them how man has progressed in ways that they perhaps never thought about. And if they found entertaining, I thought, that is true. And if I'd even said, well, are there any questions? Even if there had been some, this question would have never arisen. The question of, well, you point out how 2 stages, how we've gone to, what's next? That would never cross anybody's mind. That's the punchline of the original side order. That people continually see, not just in my example, but they can look. You're going to have to work on this one. Because it was a side dish, but I can tell it's not. Men could look at any area. They could look at a political situation going on right now, contemporaneous with this meeting, this taping. We could look at, ordinary minds could look at a situation in some part of the world where there's been warring factions, 2 religious factions, 2 nationalistic factions. It could be a change in the economic policies of one country. It could be something that apparently was a problem at some time. And it does not have to have been thousands of years ago. It could have been an apparent conflict, an apparent problem that arose 2 years ago, that a particular government in some part of the world changed direction, that they went from being a totalitarian government to a voting republic. And at the same time, they decided to change economic policies to be more in line with what has already been established as the common parallel economic models to go along with a democracy. And so they tried. And within a short period of time, as bad as their economy was, it collapses. And then the totalitarian, the previous supporters of totalitarian rule jumped back in and said, see, you shouldn't have thrown us out. And so this conflict arose. And it may have turned into armed conflict. But where it was a little thing, it was big enough that the area was important enough, or it caught people's attention worldwide, and it was this thing went on. And then something happened. They went from that to a stage of saying, well, what we did is we expected too much too soon. And we're going to have to lower our expectations and face the reality of the fact that we cannot change the economic reality of our particular society overnight. And the fighting stopped. The warring factions, literally or figuratively, shook hands like, well, let's sort of time out. We got to work together. And it was a photo op, and they all shook hands. It made the headlines. And it seemed as though they went from that one stage, which was pretty simplistic. I mean, what they expect? They had totalitarian rule. They had state-directed economy for 50 years. And now, within 2 years, when an alternative, a different approach had not worked, they were about to destroy all of that from an outside view, all of that which they had managed to, they were going to destroy all the progress they had seemed to have made just within a short period of time, just because they expected too much. And then it went, and then it seemed to have gone to another stage like, well, okay, we're going to have to slow down, we're going to have to get our wits about us, we were expecting too much. Now I tried to figure out something just offhand that seemed pretty far removed from going from men externalizing gods and demons as forces controlling their lives to looking at it as being subconscious psychological ones internally. But it's the same thing in that side dish that I was offering you. Is that any time that no matter where men look, the ordinary mind, no matter where they look, no matter what activity, if it's enough to catch their attention, they will see that the activity, the thing, anything you want to pick out, that anything native to humans, that anything that they look at seems to have gone through at least a two-stage positive movement. It can appear to have gone to falling apart, but that's another story. Then we're talking about history. And it does not have the same, it does not feel to have the same import to ordinary minds. But if it is something, it's enough to hold a man's interest that this is something that is still of interest, even if it seems to have historical roots. They see it as having made at least a two-stage movement. And to some degree it will be a kind of forward movement, a positive move in this area, in this thing. And they let it go at that. They don't even think about letting it go. The ordinary mind does not see, does not sense, does not perceive a two-stage movement and then go, well, I see two stages, so hell with it. Nobody thinks about it. That's why I guess perhaps this struck you as surprising. No one perceives it that way. But the mind simply accepts if things seem to have gone from one place, from one stage to another that seems to be any positive movement, that's it. Nobody's interested anymore. Not collectively speaking. The mind of man is not. The collective intelligence of man never looks at anything that's of contemporaneous interest without seeing that's gone through at least two stages. And the second stage being some positive forward movement in their view. It always sees that. But that's the end of it. And no one ever notices that's the end of it. That satisfies the mind. To ever see what's going on in life, it cannot satisfy your mind. You cannot be third-eyed blind. You cannot look and say, well, I see that that used to be true, but now I see that something else has surpassed that. Now I see that so-and-so is true. I see two things. Well, wonderful. You got two eyes. What do you think you got two eyes for? That's like people congratulating themselves. My God, I'm conscious. My God, my mind works. Well, at least enough to make my lips work, my tongue work. Or, my God, I'm alive. Thank you, thank you. Try to be humble about it, as well you should. To ever see anything beyond that, then the immediate question, to put it in the context I just did, was you can see in any area, such as the one I did about forces controlling your life. Because anyone knows this. The more sophisticated and would-be hip and educated and knowledgeable ordinary people are, the more difficult it is for them to come to any sort of intellectual grips with this. But humans know. Perhaps those of you at home that's never seen this show, you should turn the sound off for a second, a couple of minutes. When I do this, you can turn the sound back up. Okay? Good. Everyone sane knows this. They know that there's a lot more running human life than they can figure out. All right. Anyone with any sense knows that they're not captains of their destiny. That's why when things seem to go right, people will pay for they'll spend more than the price of a bottle of Andre champagne. Yeah. When things go a little well, that's when people go, "Ha, thanks to me," because it's so seldom that things seem to go in the way in which they figured, in the way in which they desired. The rest of the time, they know that things are completely out of hand. I try to do just the smallest nice thing in the world, and I can't do it. I try to make the slightest change whatsoever, and unless I put myself in some sort of an unusual degree of stupor or drunkenness or imagination, I know damn well all ideas of me changing myself is just it's a dream. All right, you can turn the sound back. Anyway, everyone knows that. All sane humans know that. They cannot verbalize it. They cannot confront it. It's the dividing line, not just between ordinary people and those who would be extraordinary, but it's also a dividing line between those that would be extraordinary and those that even have some chance of doing it. Because many people think that they would like to pursue a great mystical quest, but they never get past the first stage. They never get past the point of realizing that trains make a lot of noise, including the mystical Orient Express, to give flaccid passengers something to think about. You didn't like that? All right. The only reason they're mystical systems is for flaccid mystics to have something to think about. All I want to do is find a great mystical system. Well, why is that? Well, so I can study it and have something to work with. Well, good. I repeat, one reason trains make so much noise is to give the passive passengers something to occupy their mind. Everyone knows that they're not in charge of life to some degree. And I don't know why you keep making me insisting that I just dance around the campfire. By and large, people know that they have no idea what's going on in life, who's running it, and they know they're not. But ordinary men cannot confront that. They're not supposed to. It would do them no good. When ordinary men do fall into that, which it happens, what do we call them? Awakened? Enlightened? No. They call them crazy. Which ordinary people do become crazy. It drives them nuts. Which is another story I've touched on, but the history of man, especially in literature, without even the writers knowing it, and in religious scripture, there are all sorts of what should have been allegorical stories having to do with that. That in a sense, people who accidentally saw what was going on in life. Boy, I bet they were happy. It did them a lot of good, right? No, that's not the way to put it. It was like they became filled with craziness and ran and jumped off cliffs and high buildings and tried to dream the impossible dream and fight the impossible foe and shave with windmills. Well, yeah, it's tricky. You gotta hold your jaw just right. What should be the question, what I was going to wrap up, is once you once you can intellectually see, confront the reality of it, that man, including yourself, and it's not permanent position, but that you have relived and that humanity continues to relive and the situation continues to exist simultaneously, but it seems to be that you can go from a more simplistic view of there's the kind of forces, whatever it is, that to some great degree controls my life and what I do and think, that you go from the more simplistic view that the forces are external to me to what seems to be a more progressive view, that you have evolved, that you have become more insightful, because you then look internal, that wherever the forces lie, that which is controlling me, that seems to be beyond my control, has got to be within me as opposed to without there. To ever see anything, you should now ask yourself, what's next? Which is what people never do with in any area, but specifically in this one. Look what that leaves you. Well, it leaves you there's two ways to look at it. You have completely cut yourself off. There's no room left to stand on the continent. There is no land left. You're done for. Either that, or now you have a complete new kingdom. You've either got nothing left, or you've got a whole new area. Everything's brand new. But see, the mind, just ordinary thought, accepts that those first two, that covers it. But it doesn't. Because the second one is not conclusive. And people know that. We've been through that. People know that describing a man's less than productive behavior, sometimes his own self-destructive behavior, people know. I mean, they're aware of it. The psychological explanations are not exhaustive. They are not conclusive. They are no more conclusive. They are no more satisfactory. They are no more explanatory than our ideas of God. To say that demons made you insult and beat up all your family, to say, well, it wasn't that. It's subconscious traumas. You know damn well, if you have any sense at all, that the second one explains no more than the first one. Except it seems to. Your question should be, what's after that?